ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Nuh that Nuh alayhi salam made a dua against his people after he had spent 950 years in their midst, calling them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all he saw was their progression into darkness and evil. Each generation becoming worse off for the next. And so, in this surah, Surah Nuh, which is dedicated to this dua that Nuh alayhi salam made against his people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that Nuh alayhi salam made mention of 5 of their prominent idols, those whom they worshipped other than Allah, and those whom they rejected Nuh and rejected the notion of having a relationship with their Creator for the sake of these idols. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that Nuh alayhi salam said regarding his people, وَقَالُوا لَا تَذَرُنَّ آلِهَتَكُمْ وَلَا تَذَرُنَّ وَدًّا وَلَا سُوَاعًا وَلَا يَغُوثَ وَيَعُوقَ وَنَسْرًا. 5. That they would encourage one another when Nuh alayhi salam would call them to Allah and to the oneness of Allah and to worship Allah alone without any partners, that they would encourage one another and say, do not forsake your idols. Do not forsake the gods which you worship. And then they named 5 of them. Waddan, or Wad, wa Suwa', wa Yaghuth, wa Ya'uq, wa Nasr. These are the 5 names. Now, oftentimes people misunderstand why those who worship the idols actually worship them. At first glance, a person may think that these idols are worshipped and that these idols somehow are considered to be independent gods aside from Allah. And that is incorrect. The majority of idolatry is based on the idea of shafa'ah, the idea of intercession. That these are not gods that create along with Allah, that these are not gods that have control over the entirety of the universe, or they maintain the creation of Allah. Rather, these are saints which are very close to Allah. So in their estimate, just like a king, you have a king and you can't go as a peasant directly to the king. That's not how it works. You have to go to one of the king's courtiers or one of the king's ambassadors. And you get in close with this person who's part of the king's court and who can whisper in the king's ear, and so you get their attention. You lavish them with gifts. You do things for them so that they in turn can intercede on your behalf with the king. This is the idea. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the idolaters of Quraysh that they said, مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَا إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفًا. That we only worship these idols that represent saints, in their estimate, that are close to Allah. We worship them so that they can draw us nearer by way of intercession to Allah. And so these 5 names of the most prominent idols and gods that the people of Nuh insisted on worshiping. In Sahih al-Bukhari, Ibn Abbas radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma tells us the origin of these 5 gods. He says, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa an abi, that these are the names of 5 righteous men that were early predecessors in the early generations of the people of Noah. He mentions that these individuals were righteous people. The people of Noah, their religiosity was on the decline. What does that look like exactly? I want you to envision the culture that conceived of these idols, that later started to worship idols. They were righteous people. They believed in Allah alone. They were upon the religion of Tawheed. They were upon the fitrah, and they were upon the religion of Adam alayhi salam. However, they started to cross the boundaries of Allah. They started to do bad things. They still believed in Allah alone. They still worshiped Allah alone. But their religiosity started to slip. They started to make sin a habit. They started to consume intoxicants. They started to dabble in zina, things like this. They started to steal from one another. Dishonesty became prevalent. But they still loved Allah and His Messenger and still believed in the oneness of Allah. These 5 men, Wad and Suwa' and Yaghuth and Ya'uq and Nasr, these were 5 righteous men amongst them that used to stand in the marketplace and command good and forbid evil. They used to remind the people of Allah. And they used to have gatherings just like this, where they would sit and teach and instruct and inspire. But these people, they became old and they started to die off. And in their ignorance, the earlier generations of the people of Noah said, when these men die, who's going to be there to remind us of Allah? Who's going to be there to command us with good and forbid us with evil, to teach us and instruct us, to lead us in guidance? So they got the idea to make statues of these men. They looked like them. They carved them out. They had the same features. And they placed these statues in the places where these men used to sit and teach. So you would come across a place, you'd find this statue of one of these righteous men. And the idea was, we are going to make these statues. They're going to look just like them in the same place. And when we see them, we'll remember what they used to say to us. We'll remember their legacy. So they were memorializing these figures, these saints, these close people to Allah, these righteous men. And so they did that. They made these figures. They set them up. And they continued to stray from the path of Allah in the form of sin and innovation. And generation after generation, what happened? They forgot where these idols actually came from. What are these? These are antiques, antiquities of our forefathers, but we don't really know the entire story. And so what happened? Over time, when they forgot, the institutional memory of the community forgot what these idols were actually for, a shaitan whispered amongst them, these are the gods of your forefathers. Your forefathers worshiped these idols, and these are representations of saints that are close to Allah. And if you worship these idols, that will draw you closer to Allah. And so they started to worship idols. That is how a shirk began in the human race. That is the first time when idolatry was introduced to the human being. And Nuh alayhi salam was then sent by Allah. They had completely strayed from the oneness of Allah. And so, in the narration of Anas in Bukhari and Muslim, on the day of judgment, the people will be in a state of fear and anxiety, waiting for Allah to arrive and judge amongst them. And so they will go to the various messengers and prophets, begging of them that they intercede with Allah to start His judgment. So they will first come to Adam alayhi salam, and they will say to him, "You are the forefather of the human race. وَخَلَقَكَ اللَّهُ بِيَدَيْهِ, and Allah created you with His two hands. And you were the one that was in paradise. Intercede on our behalf." And so he will say, "I am the reason that we were cast out of paradise. I am not pure enough to intercede for you. Go to Nuh." When they go to Nuh, the people will say to Nuh alayhi salam, and this is the point here, أنت أول رسول أرسله الله إلى أهل الأرض. You are the first messenger that was sent by Allah to the human beings, to the people of the earth. And so, the first messenger to be sent to human beings was Nuh alayhi salam. He was the first messenger. There were prophets before him. What are prophets? A prophet is different than a messenger. A prophet is someone who is given revelation. He's either spoken to by Allah or receives revelation, but he is not sent to a people that are disbelievers. He's sent to a people that are upon the religion of Tawheed. A messenger, a Rasul, is a higher level than a prophet. A messenger is sent to a people that are disbelievers. And so, there were prophets. There was, that we know of, definitely Adam alayhi salam. And in between Adam and Nuh, Ibn Abbas tells us there were 10 generations that slowly started to stray away from the path of Allah. And this is how idolatry started amongst them, and Allah then sent Nuh alayhi salam. And Nuh alayhi salam spent 950 years, which is the miracle he was given, alayhi salatu wassalam, to call his people. It's even said that when he was commissioned and commanded by Allah to build the ark, that he actually planted the trees as saplings, and decades or hundreds, even centuries of years later, he used those same trees that he planted to build the ark. That's how long Nuh was with his people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala entirely wiped out the people of Nuh, and only Nuh alayhi salam and the few believers that were with him on that ark, and we all are descendants of Nuh alayhi salam. So Adam is the first forefather of humanity, he's the first human being, and Nuh, after the flood, is the father of all human beings who came after him. Now, and so this is how shirk began. Sometimes we see those posters that have the tree of prophets on it. You know what I'm talking about? The tree of prophethood. And oftentimes Idris is placed as the first messenger between Adam and Nuh, and sometimes others. Those are not taken, Idris being a messenger before Nuh. That is a weaker opinion of the historians of Islam. Idris alayhi salam was mentioned in the Quran with the prophets of Bani Israel. The first messenger that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam told us of is Nuh alayhi salam. And a lot of that, those posters and so forth, they're taken from the people of the book, from the Torah, from the Injil, from the scriptures. Some historians actually adopted that opinion. And so this is how a shirk began, and this tells us what a shirk really is at its core. And if we understand that, we understand how hazardous it is for the Muslim, and how easily, just by way of negligence, shirk can come about and sprout amongst our offspring. We today, when we do things, when we say things, when we pass things on to our children, we're setting the legacy of what the next generation is going to be. If we neglect to teach them the oneness of Allah, we neglect to warn them of the dangers of shirk, just by way of negligence, shirk will come up again. And the Prophet ﷺ said in the narration of Aisha in Sahih Muslim, لا يذهب الليل والنهار حتى يعبد اللات والعزى. That day and night will not cease to be, meaning the day of judgment will not start until the people revert back to the worship of Allat wal Uzza, those idols that they worshipped in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He teach us at-tawheed, that He teach us that which we are to observe, and that He teach us that which we are to stay and steer clear of. We ask Him subhanahu wa ta'ala to enlighten our hearts, to enlighten our souls, to purify us, and to ready us for the trials and tribulations that lay ahead. Wallahu a'lam, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad, wa jazakumullahu khairan.